Okay, it's the top of the hour, so let's get started. Oh, this is not working. Oh, there we go. Okay, this is Adrian Vickis, the Carly office, and today we're going to talk about what we've learned about digitization. The agenda is that first we're going to go over some upcoming events related to Alma and Primo VE, and then a discussion and demonstration of patron digitization requests in Alma. After the demonstrations, we would love for those of you who are using Alma's digitization for document delivery, just to share how you're using it at your institutions, including how you made decisions about setup. Okay, let's talk about fulfillment is coming up on June 15th and July 2nd. You'd like to talk about with Carly staff and your iShare Library colleagues about Alma fulfillment and automated fulfillment network workflows, known issues, and Q&A. Join us online for Let's Talk About Fulfillment, Alma, not Life's Purpose. Carly office staff will be online for each session to work with your questions and facilitate the discussion. Attendees can unmute their microphones and or utilize the chat and screen sharing for participation. Sessions will be recorded for Carly staff use. Since fulfillment involves patron data, the Carly office will evaluate if it's fitting and valuable to post segments of the session for later review. Sessions are scheduled every other week into August. Registration for these sessions is available from the event page in the Carly calendar, and notes of past sessions are posted on the event pages as well. There's technical services Q&A sessions. As a technical services Q&A sessions, you can gather with Carly staff and your technical services colleagues to discuss Alma technical services topics from acquisition and cataloging workflows for physical resources to electronic resource management. Each session will include how-to presentations, discussion of consortial practices, and opportunities for questions and answers from Carly colleagues and Carly and colleagues alike. Please register for any sessions you'd like to attend using the link from the Carly event calendar. Right now, the technical services Q&A is postponed till July because of the Knowledge Day sessions that are going on. Sessions are typically held the second and fourth Wednesdays of each month. Sessions will be recorded for later viewing. Knowledge Day sessions are ongoing. There still are several of them left, which are on this slide. Lex Sleeper's Knowledge Delivery Team is offering a bi-weekly free webinar series covering the 10 most requested Knowledge Day sessions on a variety of topics, running from June 1st to July 1st. Knowledge Days are the training complement to the Luna annual conference. They're recorded for later viewing. On the Ex Libris registration page, click the register link in the EMEA North America column, or click the handy link. Register for multiple sessions simultaneously. I will put that link in the chat in just a minute to sign up for the Ex Libris Knowledge Day sessions. And after these sessions, Carly is holding informal follow-up discussion via Zoom for iShare Library staff to share what they've learned and discuss how that information may be applied in the iShare consortial environment. There will be no formal presentation, and attendees may participate via voice and chat. The Carly discussion sessions will be recorded and posted later with notes. These will be conducted like the discussion sections Carly held after the Ex Libris Primo VE Become a Expert webinars and the Ex Libris Authorities and Alma webinars. Attendees of those previous discussion sessions have said that they were very helpful. We heard your feedback and we're continuing these sessions. See the Carly events calendar or the new Carly Knowledge Days 2021 webpage for links to these Carly discussion sessions. And finally, here's a reminder about lost processes in Alma. All iShare institutions must enable lost processes on or before July 1st for local patrons, and Carly office staff will enable lost processes and automatic blocks for overdue items on July 1st for iShare patrons. Liaisons and directors were reminded by email on June 2nd by Debbie Campbell to sign up for a lost processes review meeting, which is required before lost processes can be enabled in Alma. If you have any questions, contact support@carly.illinois.edu. Next week, we will be following up directly with those who have not yet scheduled the meeting or with those who have met but not yet emailed Kylie support with their configuration homework. July 1st will be here before we know it. And that ends the list of announcements and reminders. And now we're going to move over to a discussion of digitization. Jessica Gibson will get us started with an explanation of the types of digitization mentioned in Alma documentation and how to distinguish between them.
Thanks, Adrienne. Hello, everyone. So yes, to begin, we're going to cover that there are two kinds of digitization functionality in Alma. One kind is included in Carly's Alma contract, and the other kind is not, and actually requires an added subscription to the Alma Digital project, which Carly iShare institutions do not currently have. So we want to alert you to the difference between them so that you can be confident in your digitization work. The fulfillment-related digitization workflows that are mentioned here on the slide are included in the Carly iShare contract for Alma and Primo VE. They do not require the creation of digital representations in Alma and therefore do not require the Alma Digital subscription. The two of those are document delivery, which will be the electronic resources that are digitally copied, and traditional digitization, where physical resources are scanned into a digital form. In both cases, the user is emailed through Alma as a response to their request, either with a file attachment or as a link to view the material online. The key here is that no descriptive metadata records for digital resources, also called digital representations, are created in Alma by either of these workflows. And this is the kind of digitization that will be the topic of today's discussion. So to compare that, the good kind of digitization, this is a description of the other kind of digitization. When these digital resources are managed directly in Alma, either the metadata only or together with a digital object as part of the Alma repository, this is what requires a full subscription to Alma Digital. The workflows described here on this slide will result in the creation of digital resources in Alma and should be avoided. Anything that involves adding a representation, either one by one for digital resources, using the digital uploader to create a bulk upload of digital resources, digitization that as a result of the digitization puts the digital object into the Alma repository, any depositing by end users of digital resources to Alma, any API-based creation of digital resources in Alma, or harvesting of metadata from a remote digital asset management system that is then put into Alma. Those are all of the kinds of digitization that should be avoided because they require the Alma Digital subscription. Unfortunately, iShare library staff users may actually be assigned the necessary roles for these Alma Digital workflows and may be able to perform some of these tasks in Alma without having the Alma Digital subscription. Carly has requested that Ex Libris block this kind of access to the roles and functions of Alma Digital in Alma when one doesn't have a subscription to Alma Digital, but at this time, it is currently not possible to disable these functions. Therefore, we want to educate all of you as to what these types of digitizations are that should not be undertaken in Alma. So here are just a couple of example slides where you may see these things. With the proper roles, you may see an Add Digital Representation option when you go into Alma Resources, Create Inventory. If you do see that, don't use it. Similarly, if you have created a digital representation in Alma, because you didn't know that you shouldn't, which is understandable, you may see a digital representation indication appear down in the same holdings area in an Alma search result where physical holdings and electronic inventory do. So this is just an overview to let you know and make you aware of these different kinds of digitization, which ones to avoid. And in a moment, we'll talk all about the kinds that you should not avoid and should feel free to work with. But if your institution has created any digital resources of this type in Alma with digital representations, we recommend that you do not create any more and contact us at support@Carly as soon as possible so that we can investigate that further with you.
Okay, at this point, we're going to pick up a demonstration of digitization. First, Debbie Campbell is going to show configuration options, and then I'll show a workflow demonstration of requesting digitization. And I'm going to stop sharing now.
Great, thank you, Adrienne. Let me go ahead and get my screen shared here for you all. All right, well, thanks so much. As Adrienne said, we're going to start this presentation about digitization, first looking at some of the configuration steps that are involved in the process. This will be an overview to begin, in that there are quite a few steps that are involved. And if we were to go over them all in a lot of detail, it would be pretty overwhelming. So we'll go over the steps though. We'll take a look at this webpage, which is hot off the presses. And so let me put this link in the chat for you all. We'll talk about some of the decisions that your institution will need to consider before going through the configuration processes. And then I'll pass it back to Adrienne after that to work through a few examples so you can see it in action. I would like to start out first by thanking though some library staff members who've been really helpful to me and to us as we've been learning about digitization, starting first with Ashton Trimble from Black Hawk College and Sarah McCone Chase from Northern. Last November, they presented on the Carly Resource Sharing Committee webinar, Digitization Do's and Don'ts. And so this webpage is actually based on the documentation that Ashton created for that session. I'd also like to thank Marcella Novak from College of DuPage, Jen Rocky from Eureka, and Janelle Sander from U of I, who have also been helpful in helping us with their questions they've asked about digitization, letting us watch as they were doing their setup, and then also with all of the troubleshooting. If we've heard from you as well, and I did not mention your name about digitization, please just know that your questions and your comments have also helped us to understand this new service better. So with configuration, there are a lot of steps. And so I'm going to scroll down a little bit here and try not to make you dizzy. And again, this page is new and you'll start to see it develop a bit over time, especially as we have your feedback. So I'm going to scroll down first here just to the overview, and you'll see once you see the overview why we won't spend too much time going into a lot of details in that. To set up Alma digitization, it is broken into 11 steps. And so some of these steps are planning how your configuration will look. Some are adding new settings that did not previously exist. And some of them are modifying or making some settings more specific based on things that you already had set up for other purposes. So 11 steps overall. If we find out there are more, we'll add them in as well, but here's where we'll start. So if your institution is not yet doing digitization for patron requests, and again, thank you to Jessica for explaining the difference between the types of digitization we can do as iShare libraries and the other types that are not included. The first thing that you want to do is plan how you think digitization should work at your institution. And again, this is planning for patron digitization requests, which is when you would allow your patrons to place a request for your library staff to digitize a portion or sometimes even an entire physical item held by your library. So it's kind of like document delivery in a way. Maybe if you've thought of through interlibrary loan, if you used that term before, where maybe you would allow your patron to place a request for a thing you own. You as staff would go to the shelf, grab that thing, scan it in for patrons, and then provide it to them. So some of the questions that you want to think about, talk about with your colleagues before you begin configuration. And I'd say it's important to do this planning work before you start configuration, just so that you'll have the outcomes that you expect. Of course, you can change your mind and make changes later, but these are the questions that you will need to have answered. So just to go over those, first, do you want your digitization work to happen at a circulation desk? So where staff are already logging in, doing other circ activities, or do you want to set up a separate department in Alma? That would require your staff to switch over their location that they're working from. It may depend on the staffing at your institution. It may depend on the structure of your institution. Some institutions may actually have a digitization department, which is a group of staff working in another room or another space doing this kind of work already. Other institutions may just be looking to add a little bit more functionality to what you've been offering your patrons before, and so you'd be fine if circulation desk staff are doing this work. The second thing to think about, do you want your digitization requests to require that library staff approve them before that work begins? Or will those requests all automatically be approved and you might then cancel them later, even though you may have started work? Also think about how copyright clearance will be a part of this. So will you want library staff to approve copyright clearance on these digital works before you begin that process? Do you want them to be automatically approved for copyright? How will that work for you? Think about also which local user groups, so your library's patrons, which user groups should be able to request digitized items, digitization services. Which materials can patrons request digitization? So think about from which locations, think about from which item types. Some institutions, for example, might be willing to digitize material on reserve for patrons. Maybe you have a large distance student population, or coming through this past year with the pandemic, patrons were not allowed access to your physical building. So maybe you do want to offer digitization for reserves. Maybe though that's not something that you're interested in. Maybe you'll digitize reference materials, maybe you won't. Maybe for certain users, you will allow certain digitization, but for other users, they'd have to come use the material in person. So that's the next step. Think about which users and think about which materials. And then the final two questions we have listed here. Do you want to limit the number of digitization requests that a single patron can place at the same time? So can, like, that one undergrad student ask you to digitize 100 chapters all from different books? Or do you want to say 5 at a time? We've got a limit to our staff time. We'll put in some limits there. And then finally, think about which staff at your institution will be working with these requests. And think about which parts of workflows that each staff member will perform. This will help you know which roles they need to have assigned and also help you decide how you might set up your configuration. And I'd love if you've gone through this process, you have digitization set up. If there are other questions that your institution we're discussing as part of this process, I'd love to know those. Please feel free to put them in the chat, or when we get to the discussion portion of today, you can feel free to unmute and tell us how that planning process went at your institution as well. And so step one, before you start on configuration and going through the rest of these steps, do think about all of those issues. The next thing then is to think about where those digitization locations will occur. And we'll take a look at just an example of this in a sandbox to give you an idea how that looks. But essentially there are 3 options that we know of so far, or 3 levels at which digitization could occur. So you can have an institutional level digitization department. That would, if you have multiple libraries at your institutions, it would allow those libraries to all share that same department. Or if you even just have one library at your institution, they could use that single institutional level department. The middle level for that then is a library level digitization department. So for example, if your institution has multiple libraries and each library fulfills their own patron requests, they might have their own departments each instead of sharing an institutional level one. And then the third one is allowing digitization requests to be processed at a library's existing circulation desk. So instead of having a separate space to log into in Alma, or even a separate space with different staff at your institution, this option is just having whoever's logging into the circulation desk and trained to work on this, they can process those requests. So there's more information here on how those setup steps vary based on how that would work. We've got subheaders here for the configuration steps for all of those options. We'll take a look real quick just where this default institutional digitization level is. But as you expand these out, then you'll see the steps for editing or adding a digitization department at the level described. So we've got institutional level, so the default institutional level, adding an additional institutional level department, adding a library level department, or configuring your existing circulation desk. So I'm going to move this over to the side, and I've got, let me go to a sandbox here. I'm going to log into one of our sandboxes, and I'll make this a little bit bigger. We'll see how this works with the side-by-side view. If it's too hard to view, please let me know, and I'll just switch to full screen, and we won't try to do the side-by-side. Okay, so getting logged in here to a sandbox. So we'll look at the institutional default level, but again, you have multiple options, and the one you choose will be based on the structure your institution is interested in. So with the default institutional department, this is included by Ex Libris by default in every library's Alma configuration. So if you do decide that having a department at the institutional level is fine for your structure, you actually don't have to add one for this step. You can go in and modify the one that exists. So I'll go ahead and get logged in here. We've got the steps then for how to do that modification. So we'll switch to the configuration. And then we go under fulfillment. And then under digital fulfillment, there's the area for digitization departments. And so when you're working with a digitization department, either at the institutional level or at the library level, this is where that configuration happens. So here's the default one that was added by Ex Libris. The directions here then go through how you can edit this department and make it serve your institution's own settings. So you would choose to edit. And it's got some suggestions on this page for edits you might want to make. So for example, updates you can make to make it better fit your institution settings. If there are changes you need to make to the libraries that it serves, if your institution has multiple libraries, you might make some changes here as well. Contact information is optional, but you're welcome to add that. And then finally, the add operator. This is a pretty fast way to give staff the role that they need to do digitization processing through this department. So for example, these are the list of the sample operators that already have permissions for this department. I could add myself here to give myself permission for the workflow. By selecting myself as an operator for this department, that adds the role that I would need to my account. The role that gets added then is work order operator, and it's automatically scoped to that digitization department. So once you've made your edits, you can save your changes. And we'll see how the sandbox does with that. From what I've heard thus far, the two most common setups that institutions have done have been the institutional level department or configuring a library's existing circulation desk for that work. Okay, so now I'm here in the list. I would save this to save my changes. So again, two most common, let me close this back down, have been configuring the default and configuring the existing circulation desk. So please feel free to look through those and let us know questions. So the next steps that are involved in this process kind of go together. This is modifying your circulation fulfillment policies to allow patrons to place digitization requests on their own through Primo VE, and also to give staff permission to place digitization requests for patrons. These sections, if you've already expanded them out, you'll notice that they're not fully described yet. I do plan to add some instructions for the fundamentals of these edits. That'll be forthcoming, but I thought I'd show you two examples of how libraries that are using digitization have this set up. And so, for example, Okay, so let me switch back over here. I'm going to actually log out of our sandbox. And since there's not much on our directions page, I'll go ahead and make the browser larger. So first I'll switch back to production. And the first institution we'll just take a quick look at is Blackhawk, since they are using digitization. I'll get logged in here. Once we're logged in here, again, we will switch straight over to the configuration area of things. And you will have noticed on that web page that what it mentions is that changing these settings are both very simple and they can also be very complicated. So I'll do just a few sentence overview of what the process is, but I would like to encourage you that if you would like to talk about adjusting your fulfillment policies that we're seeing here, the terms of use, the fulfillment unit rules, we're more than happy to schedule consultations with your library through an email to Carly support. We've met with quite a few institutions to review your policies, make sure they're meeting your library's needs, and in a lot of cases do some streamlining of the default policies or of the original policies that came over in your configuration forms. So here at Blackhawk, I am now logged in. This is production, so I won't change anything. But when we go to that fulfillment area, we'll go to physical fulfillments. We'll just take a look at their regular fulfillment unit and we'll look at the rules. And so digitization is governed by the rule type of request. So the request rules do a lot of things, but they handle how patrons can place requests for materials. And so you can see here the request rules that Blackhawk has for their regular fulfillment unit. There's not very many. We've got 7 of them listed here. What Alma does is it starts as it uses these rules, starts at the top, checks the conditions of the first rule. If the conditions set in this rule match the transaction, Alma uses the output from that rule. If not, it continues down to the next rule, does the same thing, checks the conditions set. If it matches, uses this output. If not, continues down. If it gets through all of the rules without finding a match, it then uses the default rule, which is non-permissive. But we'll take a peek now to see how Blackhawk has this set up to permit digitization for their local patrons. And Blackhawk is using their original rules. So they came in, they made a change to their terms of use to get this change. They didn't have to do a lot of overall restructuring of their rules for streamlining because their rules for what they're allowing to be digitized are not very complex. So for example, there's not a lot of variation here between what patrons can request for physical requesting, so regular pick from shelf list physical item requests, and what patrons can request digitization of. The more variations you have on, yes, this is physically requestable, no, it's not digitizable, yes, it's requestable, yes, it's digitizable, that's when things get a bit more complex. And that's the second example we'll look at here soon. But for looking at this rule here, we can see that those conditions are the input parameters that say if the user group is undergrad, then they get these output parameters or the terms of use. And the rule that's controlling whether this patron who is in the undergraduate user group can request digitization of these materials is this line, is digitizable. And so here at Blackhawk, is digitizable is the question. The answer here is a strange way of saying yes. So yes, it is digitizable. So this is what is allowing undergrad patrons to place a digitization request for materials from the regular stacks. So let me click back. So same thing for faculty here. Their rule is saying if the user group is faculty, then the digitization line is saying, yes, it is digitizable, therefore they can place that request. The reason this does get kind of complicated is because that physically requestable value, what is allowing patrons to place a traditional, go get it from the shelf for me, resource sharing request kind of thing, it's the same terms of use. So this first line is saying, yes, faculty can request this place a physical request for it, it'll end up in the pick from shelf list. It's the same terms of use that is also saying, yes, faculty can request to have this item digitized. Okay. So that's kind of a simple setup where they didn't have a lot of variations that needed to be made. They didn't need to say these collections yes, these items no. They were able to work with their existing request rules to enable digitization. I'll go ahead and log out here from Blackhawk. I'm going to sign into Moody Bible Institute, and I should have thanked them as well for their help in practicing getting digitization set up. For them, I haven't worked with the digitization part as much, but we did have some good experience with their configuration of their physical fulfillment. So I'll get logged in here. We'll go to that same part of configuration. And so their situation is a bit more complicated. Let's see here. So let me get this zoomed in a bit. Okay, their situation is a bit more complicated for this because they have multiple branches. They have a branch in Michigan and they have a branch in Chicago. For a little bit of history with that, they do not send physical materials between the Chicago and the Michigan branch. The distance is just too far and they don't have a courier service set up. So the physical requestability of items needs to be limited to allow Chicago patrons to request Chicago items and Michigan patrons to request Michigan items, but to not let them request across branches. So let me head over to their fulfillment. Similar place, we'll go to physical fulfillment unit. And we'll go to their regular fulfillment unit as well. And so again, these rules won't look like the ones at your institution. Each institution is different, but theirs is an example of how it can be kind of streamlined a bit to make the distinctions between what's requestable physically and what's requestable digitally. We'll switch from the rule type of loan to request. Then we can see some of the nuance we've got going on here. And so we met to discuss the options that they needed available in their terms of use and to get their rules set to reflect it. And so this is the kind of consultation we could do with your institution as well. So you can see just by taking a look at these rules 4 through 8, that we have some different variations built in. So their terms of use, you can see I think we ended up with 6 flavors. It's like, it's not physically requestable for Michigan and it's not digitizable. And the rule names help you determine like who all it's applying to. So for example, these Michigan patrons cannot physically request these things and they cannot have them digitized. So that's our output. Similarly, we have a rule for Chicago patrons who cannot physically request things and they can also not request digitization. So these are things that are neither requestable nor digitizable by Michigan patrons or by Chicago patrons. So that's our first flavor. Then we're getting into the set of things where Michigan patrons. So these Michigan patrons can request the things for physical pickup. They can also have them digitized. So we've got our terms of use that gives those permissions. I'll show you what that one looks like here. So that set as is requestable, yes. Is digitizable, yes. So that's very similar to what we saw in Blackhawk for that kind of permissive. The next one we've got then is things from Michigan, the Michigan locations that are not physically requestable, but they can be digitized. And so this is that one that allows patrons from Chicago branch to request the Michigan branch to send them a digital copy. So it's not physically requestable, but yes, it can be digitized. So for a quick look at this one, so we've got our criteria set up there to make this happen. So nope, not requestable, but yes, is digitizable. We'll look at just one more of these since this might not apply to your institution. But you can see we've then got the flip side for how this works with Chicago. So things that are, yes, requestable and digitizable. So this is where Chicago patrons can request them or have them digitized. And then we have one for Chicago things that can't be requested, but can be digitized. That's for the Michigan patrons. So again, Michigan patrons can't have the item in person, but they can request a scan of it. So this is an example of a streamlined set of these policies based on the nuance that needs to happen for the institution. There's no right or wrong way to do this, so long as it matches what your institution needs for your policies. But if we can help at Carly Support, please send us an email and we'd love to help you take a look and go through your settings. So I'll sign out of here. I'm going to go back to the sandbox. We'll quickly look through these other options that are involved in configuration. So I'll get logged back in. So the other options here, these next ones are just some quick things that you can change to make sure that they're going to help you meet your permissions. So for example, setting a limit on the number of requests that a patron can place at a time. So we have directions here with a screenshot. Working with the document delivery rules. And so this helps you to determine, this is just a setting that you have to do to determine which of your users can have their scans sent to them. So this is just a step that has to happen. Then there's a step here which will take some decision at your institution to configure those digitization and copyright rules. So with this one, there are decisions that you have to make. So we'll look at this in configuration really quick so you can think about what those are. So this setting again is in configuration. You'll go to that fulfillment area. And then under the section for copyright management, let's see where that ended up. Here we go. We've got digitization and copyright rules. This page goes through the options and then the decisions that you need to make. So choosing how the file is sent, choosing whether staff need to do an approval of the request, choosing if staff need to approve copyright clearance before digitization begins, and choosing when in that process, if you are doing approvals, that staff have to make the approval before the patron receives their scan. So for example, this you'll notice is mentioning that, let me scroll back up here, sorry. The 12 rules at the top are off by default. So these are all not enabled. So all of the changes we've been making thus far are to the default rule at the very bottom. There does seem to be like there would be an option to try some automation of these copyright rules. It's definitely not something that has to happen, but if you were interested, we'd be interested in taking a look at how that works. So for the base case though, getting digitization up and running, it all happens to the default rule where you go in edit mode to make the changes. So you'll use the ellipse, then edit, and then you've got the decisions that you can make guided by the questions here. So for example, taking a look at how the patron should receive the file. As Jessica mentioned, we do not want to add anything to our digital inventory. So you all as iShare libraries will not select this option. But you can choose between whether you want the patron to get a file attached to their email or whether you want them to get a link that they can then select to download the file from. So depending on your IT department and how they feel about files being sent, you may choose the link option, or it's kind of up to you which of those you choose. We have institutions who are using both. You'll also then so let me pick not the one we're not supposed to pick. You'll also then be making that approval and copyright clearance decision, and then also when in the workflow that approval must be completed. And again, the page has directions for helping you decide. The final things then here we'll just look at on the page so we can switch over to looking at some examples here are configuring your Primo VE digitization form. While staff can place requests in Alma on behalf of users, more often if you're allowing and offering digitization, you'll be allowing patrons to place those requests themselves through Primo VE. And so what you'll want to do then is determine which fields should the patron see in the request form when they are placing a digitization request. So this goes through how you decide which fields those are, and then how you can adjust the labels that are part of that. The other steps here. So this one is just a double checking step. If you want patrons to see the digitization request link in Primo VE, you need to make sure that you don't have a display logic rule set up that is hiding that link from your patrons. Otherwise, it wouldn't work very well if you've gone through all the effort to have it configured, but then are inadvertently hiding it from your patrons. So this goes through how to check those rules. Please let us know any questions. There's also an option that my colleague Jessica added, thank you, that it's possible to create display logic rules that are more advanced to hide digitization services only under certain circumstances. So the example here is to hide the option for digitization if there is already a full text version available. So if you're interested in the more advanced, please feel free to send an email to Carly's support. Finally, there are 2 letters that are part of this process. The letters are sent to patrons to give them their scans and attachments. So depending on which version you select, so if you're sending them the attachment, they're going to get the fulfillment digitization notification item letter. If you're sending them the link, they will get the document delivery notification letter. So the version you choose will depend on the version of file delivery you choose will affect which letter the patron receives. And so which letter you'll want to customize for certain. And then finally, just a reminder that if staff are going to work with digitization, they will need appropriate roles. And so here at the bottom just lists the roles we would expect those users to have if they are going to perform those functions. So I know this is a lot of information that we went over pretty quickly. I'll put this link in the chat once more. And if you're interested in digitization and would like us to be present while you're going through the setup, please feel free to let us know. Please also feel free to send any questions. And I'll go ahead and stop sharing and turn it back over to Adrian to do some demonstrations. And Adrian, you are muted.
Sorry, in the UIS sandbox, I have set up digitization, and now I'm going to show you the workflow for a request. So say I'm going to look for an item, and I'm going to misspell study skills. Okay, well, I think I got some results anyway. Oh, okay, so we got improving reading and study skills. If you click the record and you go in to get it, and you have to be logged in, you'll see this little thing here that says digitization, and then you can click on that and then fill out the form about what you want digitized. And then you can send the digitization request. And it'll tell you when the request is placed. And then we go into Alma. And something's blocking here. Okay. This is improving reading and study skills. So I'm going to search for that to get the barcode. I mean, ordinarily the book will, you get the book through the pick from shelf list. It'll show up on the pick from shelf list and you can grab it and then you can go from here. But since this is an example, I'm going to grab the barcode. Okay. Oh, there's 2 of them. Okay. Let's see if this is the correct one. Okay. And then you go into fulfillment and then scan in items. Oh, I'm sorry, I was going to tell you what the setup was for this. It's circulation desk, digitization department. It has approvals turned on and copyright clearance turned on, and it this one is sending a file instead of sending a link. Okay, so I'll scan item barcode. And so you see it's down here, it says patron digitization request. Then you can go to manage in-process items, digitization department, and then you click on the ellipse here, and then it says you check next step. And the next step would be to digitize the item and then attach it. You have to attach it either for sending an attached file or for a link. But for the link, what it'll do is Alma will store it and then send the link to get to that file. To go to attach documents and add attachment. I'm just going to do a dummy file, just to have something to attach. And then add attachment. And then done. However, this request has not gone to the patron yet. The reason is that you have to also approve it if you have approvals set up. To go into approvals, and here it is waiting to be approved. And you do work on. And then enter a copyright clearance number, and then approve. And then you have a reason covered by license. There's a whole list of reasons. And then click submit. And now what should happen is now it should go to the patron. It should show up in my email in a minute here. Let me. Yeah, okay, here we go. I don't know if you can you see the letter? Or is it still showing the
We are still seeing Alma.
Oh, okay. Well, it sent a letter saying with the attachment saying here's your digitized request. And that's everything I had to show you. So the next, I'll stop sharing. So our next question is, does anybody want to talk about how they've implemented digitization at their institution?
And I've just put a link in a chat. We are working on a web page with some processing directions for the how to kind of step-by-step workflow. That page is not yet published, but I've given you the sneak preview of where it will be. And so we'll send out an announcement once we have that page ready to go. And yes, seconding Adrian's question, if you are using digitization at your institution, we'd love to hear any tips you've got, any problems you've encountered, any decisions that you needed to make that would be helpful for others to hear as well.
Well, does anybody have any general questions that they have?
Yeah, if there aren't questions about digitization at this time, we know it was kind of a whirlwind tour of setup and quick demo. But if you've got any questions about digitization or just to open it up to general Q&A, we've got about 12 minutes left of our time. Please feel free to unmute or to type in the chat. Got a comment that says, the number one thing is that I always forget is the attached document phase. There is an option for save and one for done. And I tend to hit save out of habit instead of done. And so do you mind mentioning what happens if you select save? So is done what actually sends it off to the patron, and save is kind of just pausing it for later?
If you click save, you have to then go back in and click done before it'll get sent to the patron. But you don't
Gotcha.
have to click save. You can just go straight ahead and click done, and then it'll be done.
Gotcha. So save is like giving you another moment to think about things before you actually send it along to the patron, but done is what actually gets it out the door.
Right.
That's a good tip. Thank you.
Sorry if you can hear my cat. She really, really wants on my lap, so.
Yep, and if you have questions or comments that are not digitization related, feel free to bring those up as well. We've got a question whether analytics keeps track of digitization activity. I believe that it does. The resource sharing committee, I'm not sure, checking to see if Ashton was here on the call. The Carly Resource Sharing Committee has a subcommittee that has been meeting every so often to start taking a look at some analytics reports that they'd like to see become part of the Alma equivalent of what we had in Voyager as the shared SQL. And so one of the reports that we have on the list to look at that Ashton had written was a digitization, like a digitization report. So I haven't looked at that one yet, but that it's on the list of reports we're going to review makes me think that yes, digitization activity is recorded. And so we'll get to that one as the subcommittee of the resource sharing committee, and that should become then available in the shared SQL once we've had the chance to review it. Since I mentioned it, I can share where that shared SQL will be. Let me get my, or is actually, let me get my screen set back up over here. So if I go to, the Carly homepage, let me start over here. And then under that products and services, I share documentation. I'll go ahead and mention that the documentation link that I shared, you can find that, or the digitization link, you can find that just by doing a search for digitization. So digitization, that will come up in your search results. Now it's one of the first links. Also though, from products and services, I share documentation. This one is linked under the area, the digitization document is linked under the Alma configuration and administration page, since the one I demonstrated is the one that's how to set it up. So that's here. Alma configuration, digitization for patron requests. So that's the one that we looked at. The one that we're still working on, that how to, the processing patron digitization requests, that's forthcoming. That's cross-referenced from here. This page here will be cross-referenced from there. The how-to, when it's ready, will be listed under that product services. I share documentation. That will be listed under the fulfillment, automated fulfillment area. That will be listed under the how-tos and workflows for day-to-day once it is available. So back to the shared SQL though, so back to the home page. Similar area, products and services, I share documentation. We have a section here on Alma Analytics. So analytics and reports. And then, so the shared analytics reports, they've got different subsections based on topical area. So the ones that the committee has been reviewing are not yet published. We still need to do the write-up about what the report includes, what the fields contain, and then variations that your institution might need to consider, but then they'll be listed under the areas here. It's also though has mention of reports available out of the box from Ex Libris, which there might possibly be some digitization ones in the Ex Libris provided reports as well, that but I have not reviewed those myself. Any other thoughts and questions from everybody who's here? All right, well, I think it's been quiet for a little bit, so we can probably go ahead and get 5 minutes back in our day. We can stay, um, we can hang around till 3 o'clock if someone has a question they didn't want to ask here in the chat, but it's been lovely to have you all here. Please let us know any questions as you're looking over the digitization documentation. If there are any edits or suggestions you'd make, we'd be happy to hear them as well. So thank you so much for being here. It's been nice to talk to you, and have a good rest of your Thursday.